So you landed an opportunity to sell yourself for that dream job. Well, stick around because in this video, I'm going to share with you some tips on how to make that perfect first impression. Hey everybody, it's Brian from Life After Layoff, and today I want to share with you some tips on how to make a great first impression on your interviewer. Now, if you're in that first round interview, you want to make sure that you stand out from the crowd because chances are you're probably up against some pretty stiff competition. And in most cases, once you make it to that final interview, we're usually interviewing between 3 to 5 finalists. So in this video, I'm going to share with you 12 tips that you can apply to make sure that you make that great first impression. But before we get too far into it, if you're interested in more videos just like this one directly from a corporate recruiter, make sure you hit the subscribe button and consider hitting that notification bell if you don't want to miss any future videos. All right, so let's get into some tips on how to make that great first impression. Tip number 1 is to be early and ready to go. So if you're somebody that usually runs 5 or 10 minutes late everywhere you go, this is not the time to do that. Set an alarm, make sure you get up in plenty of time, take account for traffic. If you're going on an on-site interview, make sure that you also account for the parking, walking across town, all of that kind of stuff. And if it's a Zoom or video interview, you want to make sure that you test out the technology beforehand. You don't want to wait till 5 minutes before to try to start logging in for the very first time on that particular platform, because inevitably, if things don't go well, you're going to be scrambling and it's going to put you on tilt. The same thing goes for when you're on site and you don't take into account all of those things that we just spoke about. You enter into that interview and you're just on time or rushing, it's going to show and you're not going to be able to sell yourself the best possible way. And as the interviewer, I'm probably also going to be able to tell and pick up on your sense of nervous energy because you're running late. And that's not a good first impression because it shows me that you're not really that prepared, or you're somebody that doesn't manage their calendar very well. Either way, it's not the impression that you want to leave your interviewer the very first time you talk to them. Now, if you're on an on-site interview, the second tip is going to be to give them a nice firm handshake, because a handshake actually tells us a lot about the confidence that you carry yourself with. And honestly, it does make an impression on me if you give me a very weak handshake. Another thing to point out is if you're somebody that suffers from nervousness and your hands and palms start to sweat, never offer the interviewer a sweaty palm. It is a huge turnoff. Make sure that you wipe down everything, wash your hands before you walk in the door, and that way you'll try to avoid an uncomfortable or unpleasant situation. And while you're at it, make sure you dress for success. Dressing appropriately is going to give you a sense of confidence. And if you're underdressed or overdressed, you're probably going to be pretty self-conscious in that interview, and you're not going to make the best possible first impression. If you're not sure what the expected dress code is for the interview, it's appropriate to ask your interviewer to clarify. And let me give you an anecdotal situation on why it's so important to pay attention to that. I worked at a large manufacturing firm, and we didn't want people showing up to a plant interview in a suit and tie, even for the professional roles, because it was part of the company culture. And we would very directly instruct the candidates not to wear suits on site. And if somebody wore a suit on site, it was an indicator that they couldn't follow directions, and it was actually a negative strike against you. So pay close attention to what the dress code might be. And if you're unsure of how to dress for the interview, just ask your recruiter and we would be happy to clarify for you the expected dress code for the situation that you're going to be going into. All right, another tip is to make sure that you've got physical copies of your resume for all of the interviewers. And this is important because it shows your preparation. Now, usually the interviewer is going to have it printed out beforehand, but there might be a case where a last-minute interviewer gets pulled in, they don't have a copy of your resume, and if you have it prepared for them, it's just going to make a better first impression. And if you're on a virtual interview, just have your resume handy that you can send off in a quick email or even over the interview chat. Now, the next one is something that I actually struggle with myself. It's remembering all the interviewers' names. Now, if you're in a panel situation where you're interviewing with a lot of people all at once, it's probably going to be pretty difficult to remember the names of each interviewer. So it's worth writing them down on paper as they introduce themselves, or use one of those common memory tricks. But whatever your method, try to figure out a way to remember the interviewers by name. The next tip goes into your prep before the interview. It's going to be to carefully read the job description at least 2 full times, because you want to make sure that you understand the nuances of what the job is asking for. Not only does it show that you're prepared, it's going to show that you're interested, and it's going to give you some ammunition for the interview questions themselves. Pay close attention, make sure that you ask any clarifying questions that you need on the job description, and your interviewer is sure to take note. But whatever you do, you don't want to walk into the interview not knowing what job you're interviewing for. And I know that sounds silly, but it actually has happened to me more than once. And in every case, that person did not end up with an offer. So take the extra step, read the job description a couple of times before you walk in the door, and be prepared. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about research. We want to do research before we walk in the door, but we want it to come across as organic, because I'm inevitably going to ask you, tell me what you know about the company, and I'll fill in the gaps for you. And it is a litmus test for me to see how engaged you are with the interview process, because if you haven't done any research, it's going to be an indicator to me that you're not taking this opportunity very seriously. And so do your research, but try to keep it organic. Spitting off some obscure facts about the company doesn't really impress the interviewers. We would actually rather see you engaged in the type of work that we'd be doing, or maybe the division that we're working in. So if you can find some news about the division and maybe a relevant project, it's going to be a lot more interesting to us than you simply regurgitating random Wikipedia facts about the company. Let's talk about eye contact. Eye contact is really important throughout the interviewing process. If you're somebody that is introverted, it is something that you're going to need to practice. So get in the habit of making good eye contact. And a good way to do that is to actually practice in front of a camera. When I started making these videos, I was not comfortable doing them. But as I've made more and more videos, I've started to become more comfortable with making that direct eye contact because it is engaging. So if I'm off looking at my notes the entire time, it's not as engaging as me turning to the camera or turning to the eye of the interviewer and speaking to them. So really try to increase your eye contact, but not to the point where it seems uncomfortable. It's okay to take pauses and be natural, but we really want to show engagement in the interview, and eye contact is a great way to do that. This next tip is something that I see pretty frequently, and I don't recommend that you do it. It's bad-mouthing your current or previous employers or bosses. Listen, we all know that there's bad situations and toxic bosses, but try to take the high road in the interview, because it never really helps you sell yourself when you're bad talking or trash talking your previous situation. So try to put a positive spin on that bad situation and make some lemonade out of those lemons, because that's going to leave a lot better first impression on an interviewer than you complaining. Now, the next tip is crucially important. It's answering the questions directly and fully. If you're somebody that tends to be long-winded, you really need to be cognizant of that in the interviewing process. I like to stick to a rule of trying to keep my answers to 3 minutes or less. And if you feel like you're going over the 3-minute mark, it's probably a good indicator to you that you're talking too much and you're rambling. So make sure you listen very carefully to what the question is asking and give the interviewer exactly what they're looking for. Now, this next tip usually happens at the end of an interview, where I ask you if you've got any additional questions for me. Don't keep on selling yourself and trying to convince me that you're the right fit for the role, because listen, by that point in time, I already know if you're going to go into the yes or the no pile. Unfortunately, at this point in the interview, you're not going to change my mind. If I liked your interview, you're going on. If I didn't like your interview, then unfortunately, there's not much you can do. But I have seen people who were in the yes pile move to the no pile because they talked too much. So be very careful about what you say. When I get to the end of the interview, if I ask you if you have any other questions for me, keep them questions related to the job and your interest in the position. Don't keep on selling yourself, because it's only an opportunity for you to put your foot in your mouth. So this last tip is something that I don't see very often, to be honest with you. It's sending a follow-up note. It doesn't have to be very elaborate. It can be a very simple thank you note to the interviewers that you spoke with, but it's just that little extra something that'll make you stand out from the other candidates who probably aren't doing this. And even better is if you can write out a handwritten note and send it to your interviewer. Now, the note itself is not going to get you across the finish line if you're somebody that's on the fence, but it can't hurt, and it's going to make a great first impression. And I actually have had hiring managers come to me and say, why didn't that person send the thank you note? They must not have been that interested, because especially if other candidates are doing that, you don't want to be the one that doesn't. So take a few minutes, customize a quick email to each interviewer, and in particular the hiring manager. And during the interview, try to get a business card or their email address prior to it ending. All right, so there's some tips for you to make that great first impression on your interview. So if you apply this and some other strategy that I speak about on the rest of my channel, you're going to give yourself a great leg up on the competition. But if you're somebody that is struggling in your job search and you think you need more help, it's actually something that I specialize in. Got a website called alifeafterlayoff.com. It's loaded with tips and tricks, all from a corporate recruiter's perspective. So I highly suggest that you check it out. I also have my deepest and most intimate knowledge in the form of some training courses. The first one is called Resume Rocketfuel. It's designed to teach you exactly how to write a resume that is going to give you the best chance of getting noticed by that recruiter and ultimately landing the first interview. And once you get that first interview, it's up to you to sell yourself throughout the rest of the interviewing process And that's where the Ultimate Job Seeker Bootcamp comes in. It is designed to teach you how to get through each step of the interviewing process and ultimately land the dream job. So make sure you check it out. Appreciate you watching. Happy interviewing, and we will see you on the next one.